Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird. Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Episode 271, Milwaukee Mafia and the Ghosts of Brady Street. I am joined today by my lovely haunted historian sister, Allison Jornlin.
Hi, everybody, and happy Halloween.
And we are joined by Milwaukee and Wisconsin criminal historian, Gavin Schmitt, author of 8 books with titles that I absolutely love. Milwaukee Mafia, I've read that one, it's really good. Fox City's Murder and Mayhem. Murder Capital, about Madison, Wisconsin, which is at one point the deadliest city in the United States, and I can't wait to talk about that at some time. And also, my favorite of his book titles, The Shallow Grave. Thank you, Gavin, for joining us today on this Halloween day, 2019.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I'm glad that we're here on Halloween. It's very special to me, so right. I appreciate that.
It is the high holidays for us in the weird world. So Allison and I have told people many times about like our weird history and how we got interested in it. But how did you get interested in true crime and maybe even ghost stories?
Whew. Wow, that's the big question, isn't it? I couldn't tell you exactly. I've always been drawn to darker themes. I love horror movies. I love true crime. I went through a phase where I was really interested, not in a bad way, but really interested in like the Nazis, that kind of thing. Anytime where there's something that's dark or evil, it has this attraction, and I think that's true for everybody, but not everybody wants to admit it. Right. So, yeah, I've just kind of embraced it. And because I love local history and there's so many great stories right here in Wisconsin that need to be told, it's worked out well for me that, if no one else is going to do it, I may as well.
All right.
Yeah, and I love that you're doing that too, because there's such a lack of focus on Wisconsin history. There's so many incredible stories, and that's what gives Mike and I the opportunity to expand and do all these ghost walks we do, because what we cover is haunted history. So there's a lot of history in that. I think that's 90% history, maybe 10% ghosts.
Well, I tell you, today we will be focusing on the, we're just a neighbor of Chicago. When people think about the Mafia, the first place they always think about is Chicago, because they think about Al Capone. And
yeah, Chicago, that old glory hog.
Right, they're taking all the glory. But the funny thing is, almost any place that you go to in Wisconsin, especially up north, any bar is like, well, this was a hideout for Al Capone back in the day. And, you'll always see every place, because Al Capone did come. It's been forever that Chicago people vacation up north in Wisconsin, and they come up for vacation. And so they always like, this is where the mobsters hang out. And I think if... I don't know how Al Capone had any time to do any crime, because he was too busy hanging out in all these bars up north.
Yeah.
Oh, and everywhere. In Milwaukee, they talk about that too. Every place, it's just like if I had a dime for every haunted place that was once a brothel and frequented by Al Capone. I would have a mountain, a Mount Everest.
Well, what I think is interesting, like all of these, every place was a brothel too. It's like, how did anybody find any girls who weren't hookers to get married to? Okay. So Gavin, speaking of, how is the Milwaukee Mafia, that maybe we don't know as much about, related to the Chicago Mafia, which we've been, we all know at least some of their stories and some of the famous gangsters' names?
Sure. Oh boy. That's how do I sum that up?
Yeah, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah. So,
no, take all the time you need.
Originally, there were a number of gangs in Chicago. Al Capone led just one of a dozen different gangs. And one of those gangs was a Sicilian gang, which was a rival of Al Capone. Al Capone was not Sicilian. The Sicilian gang was actual mafia, and they were in league with Milwaukee and other cities. Um, Capone would have been a rival to Milwaukee originally. Now it wasn't until much later that Milwaukee and Chicago were more friendly with each other. When everybody kind of settled down and was like, well, maybe if we stop killing each other and work together, things will work out better. But yeah, the funny thing about that is originally they weren't really connected. They were on the opposite sides of the Prohibition era battles, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's not till much later.
Oh, okay. And so what were some of the names or families of these Milwaukee Mafia people? Because we're familiar with Frank Nitti, Al Capone. I mean, everybody who is on the Untouchables or whatever. Who would have Elliot Ness been hunting down if he'd have just gone over the border?
Sure. So the earliest days in Milwaukee, the early 1900s, the boss was named Vito Guardalabene, which is a great name.
Yeah, I was gonna say Don Vito Guardalabene.
Yeah. After him, the boss was actually his son, whose name was Giovanni Battista, but he went by Pete, of all things.
All right.
Oh, come on. I would totally.
If my name was Pete, I'd go by Giovanni Battista.
Yeah.
I know, right?
So Guardalabene early on. But some of the bigger names in Milwaukee, I mean, Balistrieri, if you know any name, it's Balistrieri. The Maniacis were pretty big. Labrizis. There's if you were from Milwaukee and you were Sicilian, I don't mean to stereotype or generalize, but you probably had a cousin or a grandfather or somebody who knew something. Like it's not that large of a community. Like at its peak, it was 3,000 people. So the mob, say there were 100 of those 3,000 in the mob, or at least connected to the mob. You're gonna know somebody.
Yeah, and I had no idea, when I'm walking around, I'm just trying to find ghost stories, and I had no idea that Milwaukee was so mobbed up. And until maybe I crossed some people that I shouldn't have. I don't know. Way back, like almost 10 years ago, I was working on a haunted history tour for the Italian Community Center. And so, of course, for MilwaukeeGhosts.com, we have our third ward, our bloody third tour that covers the third ward of the city, which was Milwaukee's Little Italy for a while. So I had a lot of stories from there, but I wanted to do some stories. It was a bus tour, so I wanted to do some stories on Brady Street. And so I went up and down Brady Street one summer day. And, I went to Scaffidi's, and they're like, oh, you know who you have to talk to? You got to go and talk to Paul Bruno. You got to go to Bruno's. And I'm like, okay. So we went down to Bruno's, and I was a little bit surprised by the reaction. Let me just tell you that. So I went in, and I just told Paul Bruno, just what I'm telling you, that I was like, hey, I am organizing this tour for the Italian Community Center for Halloween. And he said, Allison, I like your smile. But then he shouted at me. He screamed. Like he went from, Allison, I like your smile, but snitches end up in ditches. and then he went, leave it alone. Leave it alone. He's screaming in my face. And then he walks into the back room and says, I got business to conduct here. And I'm like shaking because, I didn't want to know where the bodies are buried. I didn't even know what was going on. I just wanted like some nice story that maybe his Italian grandmother told him. And suddenly he just went off. I mean, like out of nowhere. And there was this huge guy at the bar. Like, he looked like some kind of enforcer, okay? He had like huge muscles and he's sitting at the bar and he looked scared. After that happened, I just looked at him, he looked at me, and I just like left. And then I called Mike right away and I'm like, bro, it's all real. This place is mobbed up. I'm like, I'm watching my back. And yeah, so that's my story of just like about 10 years ago. And I was like, what just happened?
Were there any particular like mob stories around Brady Street or businesses or crimes that might have happened in the area that would have led a business owner to say like, hey, leave it alone. I'm right. I was just, wondering if there's any crime history in that particular area.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Two things immediately come to mind. One, there's a very well-known bakery on that street. And in the 1960s, they actually got bombed. So that's great. But then you had mentioned it in your intro, or maybe it was even before we started recording, I don't know, but about Max Adonis. I mean, that's right down on the end of the street, the corner of Brady and Van Buren, where he was killed. So yeah, no, there's definitely some Brady stories for sure.
Yeah, maybe let's talk about Max because I mean that story has so many interesting twists and turns. And Max Adonis, I mean, that's not even his real name.
No, it's not.
Was he like a professional wrestler or something?
No. You want me to go through the Max story? I can tell the Max story.
Yeah, go through the Max story.
Okay, so Max Adonis, he starts out life as Max Kajewski. He's Polish. He's not even Italian at all. And
I feel you, brother.
As the story goes, he always sort of wanted to be a gangster, but for ethnic reasons he couldn't. So he started
he's a Polish
so he started calling himself Max Adonis, thinking that sounded more Italian, which it really doesn't. But that's he thought it did. But it worked. I mean, he got himself mixed in with some of the questionable people, and he ends up being kind of like the strong arm man. There's a story where Sally Papilla, well-known restaurant owner in Milwaukee, her house gets burglarized and some jewelry is taken. So she hires Max to track down the burglars and get her jewelry back. I have no idea how the underworld works, but apparently there's an underworld network because a few days later, he's able to find out who the burglars were. He does find the jewelry and he gets it back. And so he beats up one of the guys who ended up purchasing the jewelry. This guy is a dentist. He is not a mob guy at all. He just wanted to buy some cheap, jewelry. And the dentist goes to the police and says, I got tied up and beaten. And the police are like, well, do you know who did it? And he says, well, I don't know his name, but I can describe him.
And he's really easy to describe.
Yeah, here's the twist in the story, right? Here's the twist in the story. For those who don't know, Max Adonis only had one arm. He lost one of his arms early in life working in a bread factory. His arm got caught in a machine and he lost one of his arms.
Oh, God.
So when you say you got beat up by a large guy with one arm, the police have a very short list of suspects that they talk to. So he also did.
Yeah, this is just like The Fugitive. It's the one-armed man.
He did arson for hire. He did some other things. He was never a big guy in his own right, but he would always kind of do the dirty work for other people. But yeah, later on, he ends up getting mixed up in narcotics, and that's sort of what does him in the end. He's working as the maitre d' at Giovanni's, which is the corner of Van Buren and Brady. And by anybody who's talked, I never met him, but anybody who's talked about it says he was a very sweet guy. But he was mixed up in drugs, which is dangerous in itself. And one morning he unlocks the restaurant. Two guys come in, force him to kneel, shoot him in the back of the head, and that's the end of Max Adonis. And as the story goes, two guys not long after that, matching the description, end up being found in the basement of a house on the south side of Milwaukee. And we don't know, we can't confirm that those were the same two guys, but the police were kind of satisfied that, those were probably the same two guys. We're not going to investigate this too far. They took care of this problem on their own. So, I mean, in a nutshell, that's the Max Adonis story. I mean, there's all kinds of strange little twists and turns in there because he's just such a colorful character. But oh my goodness, how you get away with being a criminal when you're that identifiable, I don't know. But
And what makes you decide you want to be a criminal or get involved in that as a tough guy kind of thing when you only have one arm? I guess one arm is all you need to shoot a gun.
sure.
But if you're beating somebody up and tying them up, how do you tie them up with one arm?
Well, sure. I mean, he had another guy with him, but yeah.
You got to use your teeth.
He was multi-talented, and he was a big guy.
He was a very big guy.
Yeah, was he like 200 or 300 pounds or something?
Well, I didn't weigh him, but yeah, but based on like the mugshot lineup photos, yeah, I mean he's a heavier guy, yeah.
Okay, so we'll go 250.
Sure,
How about that?
sure.
Just right in between.
So, Allison, when you were researching ghost stories at Brady Street, has anybody seen a one-armed ghost up and down Brady Street?
Sadly, not that I've heard yet, but I'm putting the call out there now. If you all of a sudden saw this big, kind of a short guy too,
Yeah.
this big, stocky guy with one arm, and he disappeared into a wall or something, please let me know. And especially around that end of the street where Giovanni's used to be, and it's just a strip mall right now. Sadly, but I haven't heard of any activity in the strip mall at this point. I don't know if just that horrible power of consumerism just scares all the ghosts to hell or something like that. But it may. Anyway, but hey, if anybody has a story of a one-armed ghost, it's probably Max Adonis. But I do want to share that Sally Papia, is that how you say it, or did you say?
I say Papia.
Papia.
Okay. But I have to be honest. I'm pretty sure it's Papia. No one's corrected me on it.
Oh yeah.
But sometimes my pronunciations are not great.
Right, and mine either. Especially when you just read someone's name. So let's just say Sally. Right. I know how to pronounce that. So Sally owned a very well respected restaurant down in more of the Yankee Hill area, but I mean that's not far off of Brady Street. We're just talking a few blocks, and so her restaurant was in the Knickerbocker Hotel, which actually has a lot of ghost stories. Now we don't get to tell them on the Brady Street tour, but I'm also working on a tour for Juneau that will talk about the Knickerbocker Hotel. So there are ghost stories there. And then also...
Well, let's start. Why don't we start with a ghost story there and see if we can connect it to this Sally Papita's character?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so the stories there, though, might have to do with a murder that actually took place in the Knickerbocker Hotel, where there was
I love murders.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
That's not disturbing at all. So there was you got to have death to have ghost stories, right? And I love ghost stories.
Everybody's got to have a passion.
What are you going to do? So there was a cleaning lady in the 70s who worked at the Knickerbocker, and she was found strangled with a vacuum cleaner cord in the closet of one of the residents' rooms. So the Knickerbocker, it is a hotel, but it's also even today a residence. Like one of my favorite guys, John McGivern, lives there, and but you can also, as a guest, you can stay in. I don't know if I could. I'd love to stay in John McGivern's apartment someday. But you get to stay in people's apartments if you stay at the hotel, if they don't happen to be there for that stretch of time. So that's how that works. That's my understanding. But so there were
Can you
people
wear their clothes and stuff?
Well, no, I don't know how that works. That's right. Do I get to go through John McGivern's closets? Ooh, that would be fabulous. I would love that.
Are you going to lock them?
But anyway, so there was a resident there, so not a guest, but a resident who actually moved apartments, and he actually had a handicap in one of his arms as well, but. I think he had both of them, but that he was handicapped in one, and he was accused of strangling this cleaning lady because he had moved apartments, and she was found in his old apartment. He had just moved, and she was found in the closet strangled with the vacuum cleaner cord. And there seemed to be other evidence as well, but for some reason, they couldn't make it stick, and he was exonerated. So I think the ghost story might have more to do with the murder. Certainly, footsteps are heard. I haven't heard of any apparitions, but, people talk a lot about, doors opening and closing and things of that nature. But I don't know if any apparitions have been spotted. But again, if you're listening to this episode and you're like, Allison, there's apparitions all over that place, well, please do give me a call and let me know.
So nobody's seen a vengeful cleaning lady or whatever, like coming at them with that vacuum cleaner.
But I mean, that's a story that you would think could result to a ghost. I know also this is on Prospect, actually, but the Shorecrest Hotel, that was Balistreri's hangout, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, so what was that restaurant called in there? It was
okay, so the restaurant's gone through a number of names, but I presume the one you're referring to is Snugs.
Yeah, Snugs. I mean, that's a restaurant name that for some reason just seems mobbed up to me. Snugs. So Snugs restaurant. Yeah. So in there, in a booth or a table, Balistreri, that's where he conducts his business, and his son operates the restaurant, if I'm correct. Yes.
So let's get a little history.
Your stuff.
Let's get a little history of the Balistreri family.
Yes.
Because that was, I grew up in one of my teachers, or like confirmation or communion teachers or whatever. She was a Balistreri, and one of the other kids was like, my mom says she's related to the Mafia.
Yeah, but
and I was
there's different
all right,
spellings
well, let's not
of the name.
Piss her off.
And that's a little curious to me that there's such similar names, but there's one eye difference or something like that.
Yeah,
well,
pretty much,
people could. There was in our own family name, Allison, Huberty. There's different. There's Huberty with an I. There's Huberty with a Y. It kind of depends on the Ellis Island spelling or whatever, or it may depend on people who are moving from not being literate to literate, finally spelling the name and spelling it in English. But I'm interested in the Balistreri family. Can you give us a little bit on that? The allegedly mobbed up family in Milwaukee, Gavin.
Do you want the one that is or the one that's allegedly?
Well,
maybe we talk about both, because I don't really, like Mike was saying, a lot of times there are variations on spellings, but that doesn't mean that you're not related.
Right. So let me get rid of that right off the bat. As you mentioned, there is a whole other branch of the family with a slight spelling difference, and some of the people in that other branch, there's a well-known pizza place in Milwaukee. Actually, I think there's a couple pizza places in Milwaukee, and there's another of that same branch that owns the Sendik's chain of grocery stores. That completely different family.
Okay.
Now,
when you buy your groceries at Sendik's, you're not giving them blood money.
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. If you go back, 5-6 generations, yes, it is the same family, but it's so far removed that it's not even. It would be unfair to lump them in there.
Okay.
Now, the Balistreri family that most people are familiar with, they have strong mob ties going back to the beginning, but coming over to here, to Wisconsin, possibly in Sicily. I don't really know. We don't have good records on that. But Originally, there was a company called Balistrieri Brothers, which was Joe Balistrieri Sr., this would be Frank Balistrieri's father, and his brother. Uh, I'm going to get confused. This is the problem. Sometimes it gets confusing without my notes because everybody's name is Joe, Peter, and Frank.
Okay.
There's like half a dozen Joe, Peter, and Frank Balistrieris, but I know the father's name is Joe. I think the brother's name was Frank, and they owned a trash hauling business, and they ended up getting quite a bit of money off of that, especially during World War II, because during World War II there was gas rationing. So they brought the Balistrieri brothers out with their like horse carts to come pick up the trash rather than hire the trucks. So they ended up making a good deal of money off of that. But we also know they were already involved in the bootlegging. One of the brothers was suspected of murder at one point, so they're already all the way back. It's questionable. And then Joe's son Frank, well, two sons. I mean Frank and then Frank's brother Peter. They're the ones that most people know because Frank was a big deal for 30 plus years in Milwaukee.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
he was in the paper constantly for alleged crimes, tax evasion, Las Vegas skimming, um, uh, telling other people to commit murder, not himself. We don't know of him personally committing murder, but him telling other people to commit murder. So, I mean, yeah, we don't even have to say allegedly when we're talking about Frank. I mean, it's so well documented that if you can name it, he's somehow involved.
And Frank was actually known as the Mad Bomber, wasn't he?
Well, that's hard to say. That name has been stuck to him now. I don't know where that came from because I don't see that anywhere in the newspaper or the FBI records of the time. So I feel like that got stuck later on. But that is a name that goes around, yeah, for good reason.
Is that related to that bombing from the 1960s you mentioned earlier?
Actually, it's
Presumably.
from
Oh yes, yeah, yes.
1970. Oh no. Oh, you're talking about the bakery on Brady
He's talking
Street.
about the bakery. Yeah, well,
Right.
there is that. But yeah, also, yeah, 1970s. That would be the murder of Augie Palmisano, which I think is probably the worst, at least in the modern history,
Yeah, let's talk
because
about that one definitely. Go ahead.
sure.
Sorry.
So
Augie Palmisano sounds like a Sopranos character.
Yeah, well, this is a story
it's a great
from
name.
this is a story from the Third Ward tour, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so go ahead and please tell the history on it because there's a lot to tell with this one.
Yeah, yeah. So Palmisano was uh, deep into gambling. He was a big gambler, both on the he would personally gamble and the he would take bets angle, so both ends of it. Um, and we don't know exactly what caused him to get marked for death. It could have been a gambling debt. The story that goes around is basically just he badmouthed Frank Balistrieri to his face. That's sort of like the story. But anyway, one morning he goes out to start his car, and he lives in the Juneau Village Apartments.
Yeah, so another
So
story from Juneau that I'm working on.
yeah, so he goes down, and it's an enclosed garage, like in the basement of the apartments. He goes to start his car, and somebody had put a car bomb in there. So his car blows up, and ends up damaging another like 15 or 20 cars in the lot. And I consider that to be, like I said, the worst in the modern history of the Milwaukee mob because it's one thing to take out another mobster. I mean, that's bad enough, but you don't know who's going to be in that room when that goes off. If there's some parent taking their kid to school that morning, I mean, they could have been taken out. We were very
Right, they could have
fortunate.
been obliterated.
Yeah, we were fortunate that nobody else was close enough that they got hurt, so it was just car damage. But I mean, there's no way to predict that. So that was a pretty bold move.
Yeah, because that was in the underground parking, right? For
Yeah,
Juneau Village
yeah,
Apartments. Yeah, and
yeah.
like people have felt it in the building. The building
I have
shook.
no doubt of that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and yeah, so August Palmisano, he was likely on the way to the Third Ward because he owned Palmies on Broadway there, which is just on the corner of Broadway and St. Paul. Today it's Cafe Benelux, and so he was likely on his way there to report to work. And I mean, some people say that he just keeps coming back. I mean, these are the ghost stories that you hear from.
So what do they see in Cafe Benelux? Because Cafe Benelux is where we had my brunch the day after my wedding. And I didn't see any ghosts, unfortunately, but I was too hungover to see anything.
Right. Well, before it became Cafe Benelux, it was also a lot of other different businesses. Pre-construction, there was actually somebody, one of the big wigs from the Third Ward Association, was just in there making sure everything was ready for the reconstruction and renovation of the building. Because they most recently, before Cafe Benelux, it was Good Harvest Market. So he was just doing a pre-check. He went in the building, and he's in the basement, and he very clearly hears boots walking the floor above him. And so he's shocked because he's the only one with the key at that time. And he was very sure of what he heard, and he ran upstairs. And of course, nobody was there. And then when they were setting up for Good Harvest Market, they had a lot of weird problems. The employees there felt as if they were being watched, which can be just a psychological thing, of course. But one thing that was a persistent problem is as they were setting up the store, getting all the stock ready and shelved, the lights kept going out. So, and this happened repeatedly so often that the employees just had to settle for carrying a flashlight around with them so they could get their work done. And of course, they called in an electrician. They couldn't find any problems. But then this happened for 2 weeks until the opening of the store, and then the problems ceased. But, certainly people have heard things and felt things. I did have a medium with me at one point during one of the tours in the early days, and one of the things I'll remember is that she did say that there was a man standing around in the building. One of the things I'd still like to do is present different photos to her and see if she could identify who it was. But she described him as a thin man in like a white like undershirt and with dark hair. And that was interesting to me because that was before I even knew about the August Palmisano story. It was just I knew about the haunting, and then the August Palmisano story, which I believe he was killed June 28th, 1970. Does that sound right, Gavin? I'm not looking at my script right now.
I couldn't tell you the exact date, but it was in 78. 1978.
78. Okay, that's right. So
wow, that's when I was alive. That blows my mind that people were still bombing each other.
I got it now. It was June 30th, 1978. Thank you for helping me with my brain. I am not looking at my notes, but I knew we'd get it. We'd hit it on the head if we worked on it together. So that's 1978. That's not that long ago.
No.
And that's during summer, Summerfest is happening at that time.
Yeah.
And he's blowing up the streets. That's not even, when you think about where the Juneau Village apartments are, there's a lot of people downtown, especially in the summertime in Milwaukee. And the idea that they would do a car bomb at that point. Now, was Augie Palmisano, when I think of that name, probably because it sounds a lot like his last name is Parmigiano or whatever, I think of a fat guy.
No, he wasn't.
No, not at all.
Cheese.
Yeah.
So, but the idea that, okay, he was a skinny guy, and of course he's got to be wearing a wife beater t-shirt. You think about that guy, hey, man, my name is Augie Palmisano.
Right.
That totally, it totally fits. So your psychic friend, maybe I shouldn't have made fun of her right there.
Well, I don't know. I mean, and this can all be confabulation, of course. I'm I'm just piecing things together over time, but it was just an interesting story that, she tells me about him and describes him. And then later on, like years later, I'm like, oh, look at this murder, which is connected, because it didn't happen there. But, if we do believe in ghosts, then it's, if you are entertaining the possibility of ghosts, then it's not a reach to say that, oh, somebody's on their way to work, they get blown up just all of a sudden. Maybe they don't know they're dead. I mean, we're going back to the Sixth Sense here, right? But maybe they don't know they're dead, and they just keep going back to the places where they went in life. So that's why I connect the murder to the haunting.
Sure, and Augie goes back to work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Kind of thing. So, that's a good example of a mob hit that resulted in a ghost story. I wonder if there's any other particular mafia-related stories from the Milwaukee area that might have a ghost story related to them.
Well, we're still working on the ghost story angle, but there are some really dramatic murders. And there is a ghost story about the Shorecrest Hotel where Frank Balistreri did his business. But it doesn't, I don't know what it's connected to. I've just heard rumors over the years, and it's been in the Milwaukee Journal repeatedly, that they had a big piano, grand piano there in the hotel, and that people would report that sometimes during the night it would play by itself. So, that's all I've heard of the Shorecrest, but, when you find out that, hey, there's like the head of the Milwaukee Mafia doing business in the restaurant there, it kind of confers this idea that there might be more of a story there, ghostly or otherwise. It's going to be interesting.
Well, maybe we should get, now we already had one of Frank Balistreri's, alleged crimes. Maybe we should talk about some of his other greatest hits.
Yeah. Do we know of any other hits that were attributed to Balistreri?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm probably going to miss some thinking this.
There's just so many.
It's okay. If there's
not so many. No, there's not. It's not. I mean,
it was such a slaughter.
In the grand scheme of things, Milwaukee is still a smaller town, but okay. So going back to, we'll start around 1960. 1960, we've got Izzy Pograb. That one I cannot say for sure. That one is iffy.
But that's a great story. Let's not pass over it.
Sure, I have a whole other theory on what happened to him, but Izzy Isidore Pograb, he was again a very, very large man, 350, 400 pounds easily. I mean, this guy is huge.
Yeah,
we're still talking about Milwaukee here.
Yes.
In Milwaukee.
And
he owned... That's what I mean. Like, I know a lot of large people from Milwaukee. That's all.
Well, that's true.
Sure.
There's a lot of cheese. Just saying. So was his club the Brass Rail? Am I getting that right?
You're right. You're right.
So he owns
you don't even need me.
No,
you got this.
I do need you. I have just little snippets here and there. But you can tell that I read your stuff because as you talk, I'm like, oh, yeah. Hey, there's this. I've got to talk about Uhura. There's all this stuff. So
yeah.
Tell us all about Isidore.
Okay. So he's got the Brass Rail, which was on North 3rd Street. And originally it was a jazz club. For many, many years it was a jazz club. And if you go back and you look in the old, journals, Sentinels, whatever, all the big names, if you know any names from jazz, they were there. They went through there. But at one point, he figured out that he could get just as many customers buying drinks and pay far less in entertainment if you switch from being a jazz club to a strip club. So instead of having to pay, whatever it is, $1,000 a night or whatever to have a jazz band there, he's like, well, I can just pay the dancers and they make their own money.
There you go.
So he switched over. But this, of course, brings in far more questionable people. and the people who bring in the dancers, a lot of these dancers have a side hustle. I won't say what it is, but I think it's fairly obvious what some strippers do on the side for money.
I love he called a side hustle.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, no, he does graphic design on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that. We're gonna use that side hustle forevermore.
Yeah, side hustle. I like it.
Yeah. So so that's going through there too, and it's not like he doesn't know it or anything. So it's getting him into some trouble with some people who uh, kind of oversee that type of business.
Oh, I see. So he's cutting in on their profits because his dancers have that side hustle, and it's not sanctioned by the surrounding mafia, who have an interest in prostitution in the city.
Right.
And it's also probably really successful too, because it's a strip club or whatever. It's like try before you buy. Like, so you see what the girls look like when you're in there, and then you're like, oh well, I'll take that one.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah,
So
it's a great idea.
So yeah, there's that.
Like lobsters in the tank. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There's stories that he got a load of whiskey, like stolen, hijacked whiskey that he didn't pay for, so he owed them for that. There's a lot of theories, but whatever the case may be, one night he closes up shop. He walks over to get a cup of coffee. It's like 2 a.m, whatever. He's going to get a cup of coffee, and as the mob does, they push him into the back seat of a car and drive him off, and they actually drive him all the way out to Mequon, which is quite a distance. I mean, not really, but relatively. And they shoot him and they dump him into basically a creek, I guess, right out into rural Mequon, which I don't think this was their intention, but it did a really good job of like hindering the investigation, because the Mequon Police Department didn't really have the, I don't know, capabilities or whatever that Milwaukee would have had. So that investigation didn't really go very far.
So,
sure.
Yeah, because they were in that jurisdiction. I mean, maybe they did kind of intend that, throw him in an out of the way place, and it's in another jurisdiction that's not familiar with dealing with murders.
Right. Pro tip, everybody.
Yeah, and I mean, Mequon now is kind of a bigger deal. But yeah, like in 1960, it was a rural community. So, I mean, I think most of the officers were like part time. I mean, it wasn't even like they had a real force to deal with that type of thing. So,
yeah,
they didn't know the main characters in this kind of life. So
absolutely. And so he's found, and was anyone ever apprehended for his murder?
Nope.
No. So it's just,
No.
It made big headlines though. And I mean, this was at a time when reading newspapers is like reading like some kind of pulp novel, just the descriptions in the stories specifically about pogrom. I mean, it was just like.
So what year did this take place?
This is 1960.
1960, that's right. So
Yeah.
I was just really surprised, reading the paper, how pulpy it was and how sensationalist, at that time. And we got to talk about Uhura as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so tell us about Michelle Nichols.
You really like that story.
I do. Well, I am a big Star Trek geek, so of course.
Sure.
Okay.
I love Uhura.
So this story, the Michelle Nichols story, that actually comes from her autobiography. So she wrote about that, and she was a dancer, not a stripper, but a dancer in the downtown nightclubs in Milwaukee. She was doing something they called B girls, and I don't know exactly what B girls means, but it's this scam that girls run where they get gentlemen to buy them drinks, but the bartender's in on the deal, so like they don't really feed them drinks, they feed them like apple juice or ginger ale or something. So the bar's getting like $4 or $5 a drink for like what should be like $1 drink.
Oh wow.
So So it's this scam that they used to run, and getting girls to chat up the customers.
Yeah. So, Mike, back in the old days, me being a teetotaler, I would have been a perfect B girl. I don't want to drink. I want to just have water or juice. So, I mean, that would be a perfect scam for me.
Right. So the bartender keeps half of it and you keep the other half.
Yeah.
And that's how, but it's funny that Nichelle Nichols danced in Milwaukee because you don't really, I mean, by the time you get to Star Trek V, when Nichelle Nichols does that like weird strip tease on the alien planet, when they have in the beginning of the movie, they capture like these rebels capture a bunch of Federation bigwigs or whatever, and then they send the Enterprise in there, and then they have to create a distraction. And Nichelle Nichols has this whole scene where she's scantily clad with like these big feathers and things like that. So I think if you guys remember Star Trek V, that her dance at the beginning of that film probably was something that she remembered doing in Milwaukee in the 1960s.
Oh,
so I love
man.
that idea that she honed her sexy dance craft right in our hometown.
That's right. And Mike, I should say that you have ousted me. You are now the king geek because I love Michelle, but you actually made a connection to a deep cut of something that happened in a movie with the history. So this makes you king geek.
I was 12 years old when Star Trek V came out. So when I saw Uhura do a sexy dance, it was it was imprinted on my memory forever.
Okay. Well, I have to jump in because this isn't even the best part of the story.
All right, sorry, I get distracted.
No, that's okay. The best part of the story, at least for me, is she, according to her autobiography, she has the owner of the club's attorney is just fixated on her. So he starts buying her jewelry and furs and is trying to get her to go on dates, and she keeps turning him down. And even though she doesn't ever use a name in her book, the way she writes it is so obvious to me who she's writing about. And the attorney she's writing about is Dominic Frinzi. And I love that because Dominic Frinzi is like the big mob attorney in Milwaukee. He ends up going on, gets famous because his office gets bugged by the FBI, which is a huge legal violation. He ends up running for governor at one point, which backfires tremendously because you can't be the lawyer for the Mafia and run for governor.
Yeah, I mean, that really opens you up to all kinds of scrutiny. That's what you don't want. And
he's such a cool character because even before he got involved with the mob, like his first major case was Ed Gein of all things. So I was like, this is so cool that her story is about this guy. And she never says his name, but like I said, if you know it, it'll be really obvious. And I was like, wow, like that's the cool connection right there.
So Nichelle Nichols' stalker or whatever was Ed Gein's defense attorney?
Correct. Yes.
Oh my God. It's just when you look into history, it's amazing. Kids, the library, that's the real dangerous place.
Right. But is there anything specific? So, I mean, he was Izzy's Club or whatever, any ghost stories there or anything that people have seen in the places that maybe have replaced it? Because it's probably not a strip club anymore, right?
Yeah, not that I'm aware. But I wanted to ask you, Gavin, about you mentioned Mequon in there, and there's a place on County Line Road in Mequon, and it's a place where I've had one of my own ghost experiences, and I gotta share with you, Gavin, that I just love the paranormal and the supernatural. So I'm just kind of fixated on it, I guess you would say, because I know that to experience the paranormal, it's very subtle and it doesn't happen all the time. And I mean, it hardly ever happens. So what you have to do to increase your chances is you have to do everything haunted. So, I mean, I hang out at haunted restaurants, haunted grocery stores, just anywhere haunted, haunted attractions. When I go to other haunted restaurants, of course, as I said, and when I go anywhere else, I go to haunted hotels, and that's where I stay. So I've had one of my few ghost experiences at a place on County Line Road. It was an old farmhouse. And it was a very fancy restaurant for a while called Club Forest. But before that, it does seem that it's one of those few places that may have actually been a brothel, because there's all these little rooms, throughout the restaurant. And it's not like, so many restaurants are just big rooms. It's like, no, there's all these little secret places up the stairs. These little rooms, which could very easily have, in the past been constructed
been used for sex.
Yeah, been constructed for prostitution. So it was rumored to have been one of the places that Al Capone frequented. I'm not sure about that, but it could very well have had a mafia history if it was a brothel. And so there's lots of stories about what may have happened there, that the madam was killed and, buried in the basement. So, I mean, that's a possibility. Or it may not be the madam. It may be somebody who actually injured the madam, and then some people took retribution on him and buried him in the basement. There's little documentation of this, of course. As you know, I mean, and I need to talk to you about this before we get off the call here. There's a few like police records available, at least in Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to track those things down. But I do know there's stories going back in this place, which was Club Forest, then became a Mexican restaurant called Blue Agave, and then it was a catering business for a while. And now, after a decade, I'm starting to see that someone has purchased the building, and they're slowly renovating it, but I don't know what they're going to do with it. It may even turn into a private home. But this is one of the few places where I experienced something, because I was going there to talk to somebody about the ghost stories, had a great dinner, and then went to the bar afterward with the express purpose of talking to the bartender, because those are the people that hang on to a lot of these stories. Mm-hmm. And so as I was talking to him about the latest ghost news, I had seen across the bar that there was this tray of drinking glasses that was up on this high level surface. And so as I was talking to him, at one point it lifted off and actually made an arc and crashed into the middle of the floor. Now, this is back in 2000, so I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have anything to document what happened. And I didn't see it happen because I'm making eye contact with the bartender. So, but I had seen it there previously, and then I saw where it landed. So I know that it landed in the middle of the floor. I mean, it just didn't travel to the edge and then fall straight down. So what I always tell people is I wish I would have had just a measuring tape with me. And I carry one with me everywhere now. But I mean, even though that was so many years ago, and it's never happened again. Were you
talking about a particular story when it happened? Like, were you talking about something in particular?
Not that I can recall. We were just talking about, hey, what are the latest ghost stories here? And, there's stories there of apparitions. Like, people have been in the basement and seen a guy in a really nice suit with cufflinks, and there's these details because you don't necessarily see the face, but you see, the arm with the cufflink, or, mm-hmm. So you get the impression of the person without maybe seeing the whole of it. But there had been many stories from the basement and from other areas, but I was just shocked to be in the bar room when this happened, and everybody around just got really freaked out because nobody was near it except for one employee who was just getting off work. He had just come to the other side of the bar. He was just standing there. And so it just flew essentially over his head. So he was quite shocked because of his proximity, but nobody was touching it. And it crashed into the middle of the floor. And so now I carry that measuring tape because I thought if I would have had the forethought to do that, I could have measured like where the tray originated and where it ended up, and been able to have somebody help me with the math to calculate the force it would have required to end up there. But so that's one of my very few ghost experiences in over 20 years of investigating. So I wondered, Gavin, if there's any other stories of Mequon or along County Line Road that you are familiar with.
No.
So it's just that's a big build up there. So just a pogrub murder that he was dumped off there.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible, but I mean, offhand, no, nothing comes to mind.
Yeah. So because this would be a very easily distinguished place because it's an old farmhouse and it still has an attached silo. So. It strikes a, very distinguishable figure. But yeah, so I'm always interested in, how I can do some more research. And I know, that maybe we could talk about some of your sources. I know that you've probably used FBI documents, but, what are some pointers, some pro tips that you could give me or other people who are interested in looking into the history of different places, haunted or not?
Okay. Well, so for what I do, I would say well over half of what I do comes directly out of FBI documents. I supplement that with newspaper reports and genealogical information. To a lesser extent, police reports. You had kind of sort of hinted at the trouble of finding police reports, and you're exactly right. The general rule is that the police departments will hang on to homicide cases, but just about any other crime, I mean, after 10, 15, 20 years, a lot of that stuff gets tossed.
Yeah.
So for the older stuff, they just don't have it on record. They don't have, the space to hold on to that stuff indefinitely.
And I'm so disappointed by that because as Mike and I have talked about a lot, when paranormal things happen, people call the cops. I mean, if it really happened, if they're not just making up a story, they call the cops because they're really afraid. They think someone's going to get hurt. They don't know what it is. They just need help. And certainly, even going way back, into the 1900s, 1800s, there are stories where people had something paranormal happening in their house or in their neighborhood, and they called the cops. And the reason I know that is because of these archival newspaper reports. But wouldn't it be great to be able to get a hold of those police reports? But I haven't been able to find a source because I've been told that Harold Breyer just dumped all the historic reports in the 70s. Harold Breyer, so many reasons to be upset with him. But and that's one of them. I'm just hoping that one day, somebody on eBay or one of these antique houses or something will reveal that they have a collection that they've kept in their family or something like that.
Yeah. Well, how do you get FBI documents? Do you just call, just Google J. Edgar Hoover, or who do you who do you call at the FBI if you're saying I'm looking for anything related to Mafia in Wisconsin or FBI investigations of organized crime in Wisconsin, and do they send you to some archivist or whatever?
It's actually probably easier than that. So it used to be that there was an email address that you would just send a request to. And then I don't know if they got bombarded or what, but they got rid of the email address. You can't contact them through that anymore. Now there's a form you have to fill out, but it's still really simple. I mean, you just go onto the FBI website, and for those who don't know, I mean, this is called FOIA. It's the Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah.
Any government document is a public document. So you go on there and you fill out the form, you say what you're looking for, and then they'll. Sometimes it takes a long time, but they'll send it to you, and it's really cool because if you are a new requester, the first thing you request, they'll give it to you for free. If you're a regular requester, then they start charging you $15. But that's still pretty dang cheap for what you get, because sometimes you'll get 500 pages. So $15 isn't really much at all. And if you're really really bad, then you end up like me on a list that's called the Vexum Filer list, and then
The Vexum?
Vexum, yeah, Vexum Filer list. There's like a top 10 list of people that are really annoying with their requests. But although that sounds bad, it actually has disadvantages because I do have a phone number of a person that, like, when you get on that list, they give you a phone number and you can, like, actually talk to people directly at that point. So if you're
Really?
persistent and annoying enough, they'll actually let you talk to people directly. But yeah, but for the average person, I mean, yeah, it's really simple. You go to the website or you can Google, like FBI FOIA, and the form will come up. This is the only thing that's very important is if you're looking for an individual, the individual has to be deceased. They will not give out their investigation file on somebody still living. I presume because it would be embarrassing to the FBI, knowing what they
Right.
were doing. Because sometimes you find out that they were doing things that they probably shouldn't have been doing.
Of course.
But
I mean, just what J. Edgar Hoover himself did was, those wiretaps and things like that
yeah,
were,
yeah,
completely illegal. I'd say for the last question here, I wanted to save this to see if we had a little time, and just one of the reasons that I read your Milwaukee Mafia book originally was because Allison and my grandfather was arrested in the 1940s for running numbers.
okay,
And so what he would do is they had to have these numbers, and they would have special pockets in their coats. And like our aunt would have to sew their coats where they could like hide these numbers in there. And my mother has said that I remember one time she said that her father was arrested and his picture was in the newspaper as part of a John Doe investigation. And she was wondering if I could find that newspaper for her. So I looked and I wasn't able to find that because not all of the Milwaukee Journal and Sentinel stuff is online from that time. But there is a lot pertaining to a John Doe investigation in the either late 1940s or 1950s.
Sure.
And so I was just wondering a little bit about the Polish Mafia and the numbers, because I know there's a lot in your book about the black criminal syndicates that were running, ran their own numbers kind of thing, and you talk about that a lot in the book. But I was interested: is there any kind of Polak Mafia that you could tell us about in Milwaukee that may have ran the numbers or anything like that, or any particular John Doe investigations you remember when you were doing research?
Sure. I mean, if you want to get a hold of me after this, and we can try to, maybe if you give me some names and stuff, I can try to figure that out for you. But
Wow, thank you.
sure. But yeah, definitely. I'm going to answer that in two parts. First of all, yes, there was a major John Doe investigation into gambling in the 1940s. That's completely true. It was primarily the Jewish community that was targeted at that point.
Okay.
But yes, I mean, there was a big investigation at that time. As you probably recall from now. I have to be clear. There's two books I have both called Milwaukee Mafia, which is terribly confusing and is not my fault. That's on the publisher.
Yeah,
But,
and there's one that's more of a pictorial from Arcadia, I think.
Right.
And then
Correct,
there's
yep.
the other one that is, like full-fledged
right,
book.
right. That's from Barricade. Yeah. So in the full-fledged one, it's a white covered book. I mean, one of the early murder stories involves like the grandson of the mob boss marrying into a Polish family.
Uh-oh.
And they're at dinner, playing cards one night, and he ends up getting shot through the window.
Oh.
So I mean, this is not to say that you had to be connected to the mob to run numbers. I mean, everybody gambles, but there was. I mean, if you were involved in the mob, you could have Polish connections. You wouldn't be a mob member because again, there's those ethnic limitations of who can and can't be a member.
Right.
But there was some overlap because I mean, again, this is Milwaukee. It's a relatively small town, and even later when Frank Balesri was in charge, like one of his biggest right hand man was Frank Stalow, who is Polish. I mean, there's actually a fair number of Polish people who got mixed up in the mob because I mean, granted, it's Milwaukee. I mean,
Yeah, and let's not forget our friend Max Adonis.
and Max Adonis. I mean,
Polish.
you
Right,
can't
the
just
one-armed
ignore
Polish
the fact that
enforcer.
you can't ignore all the Polish and German people. I mean, that's
They
you're
like
selling yourself
crime.
short. Yeah,
Yes, it's an equal opportunity practice, I guess.
yeah,
Everybody likes to murder people.
yeah. So so to actually be a member, you'd have to be Italian or Sicilian, but that's just a technicality. I mean, you could still be a gambler, you could still be a pimp, you could be whatever. You just you don't get a badge. So
Sure, you could live your dream. You just weren't a made guy.
right. Which I mean, what's the difference, really?
It's all semantics.
Yeah, pretty much.
So there was a major John Doe investigation in the 1940s. So okay, so
Yes.
there is a chance that we can find out to see if Allison and my grandfather was on the cover of the newspaper for being picked up in that. I hope we can find that. But can you? Okay, the one
That's
thing
going to
though,
really help our street cred. You know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
Gavin?
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because when I formally declare myself a super criminal,
Right.
I'm looking
And then-
forward to saying I come from a long line of connected men.
And I'm not going to have people like threatening me in bars then, because I'd be like, do you know who I am?
Right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
you're going in the ditch,
yeah, I mean,
pal.
yeah, you're not wrong. The 1940s, there was a big John Doe investigation, and there were a lot of photos in the paper at the time. But it was primarily like Russian Jews. It was like a guy named Joe Krasno. It was a guy named Oscar Plotkin. I don't recall offhand any Polish names, but maybe I wouldn't even recognize it as a Polish name. So I don't know.
Sure. I mean, Oscar Plotkin, he sounds like a guy, like he sounds like Lenin's best friend.
Sure.
And it's like, oh, Oscar Plotkin, obviously, he's the guy that, he set up the bread program in 1921, St. Petersburg.
Right. He
Or I
follows
guess
the party line.
Vladivostok. Okay. So final question. What's your favorite Milwaukee ghost story, Gavin? Is there
A
anything
Milwaukee
particular that
ghost story
strikes out?
or a mafia story?
Okay, I was saying I don't have a favorite ghost story because I actually don't really know much about the ghost angle. So I wouldn't be much help to you if I had to tell you my favorite ghost story.
All right, but what's your favorite Milwaukee Mafia story?
Well, I don't know that I have an all-time favorite, but because I
They're
mean
like
I'm always
children.
pardon.
They're like
It's like-
children. Like there's
it's like
something
children,
beautiful about
yeah.
every one of them.
Yeah. I mean, because I'm still like the research is always ongoing, and when you get latched onto something, that's going to be your favorite for a while. So right now, what's really been consuming more of my focus than other things is a man named Louis Fazio, and Louis Fazio, I love this guy. I mean, not in that way. I mean, a terrible person, but he starts off. He's a petty burglar. He moves on into pimping. He's involved in bringing underage prostitutes all throughout the state. So he's kind of known throughout Wisconsin, from all the way up to Hurley down through even northern Illinois. He moves on to murder. He serves a little time for murder. He gets back out. He's involved in gambling, and then eventually in 1972, he himself gets killed. So I find him fascinating because he came from what's an otherwise good family. Like his family was a well-known restaurant-owning family. I like to refer to them as the black sheep because the other Fazios were all successful, not really criminals. And then there's this guy who's burglar, pimp, gambler, murderer. Uh, I don't know how that happens, but
Wasn't that Laverne's last name too? Or no, didn't they have a friend named Mr. Fazio?
from Laverne and
Laverne and
Shirley,
Shirley?
yeah, probably.
Awesome.
But yeah, that one. I mean, I'm trying to find out more and more because just like almost every murder in Milwaukee's mob history, it's unsolved. So it's 1972. He's shot dead, and they don't even have a suspect. At least publicly, they've never announced a suspect. So I would love to know more about that. So he's always in the back of my mind.
So you're telling us there were a lot of murders that were unsolved. Ergo, we've got tons of murderers out there going unpunished.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I tell people when I give talks. I mean, in the grand scheme of things of how many murders there's been in Milwaukee's history, the mob murders are a relatively small percentage. I mean, we don't have just hundreds and hundreds of mob murders in Milwaukee. But if you were to take the percentage of unsolved murders, the mob murders are a significant percentage. Because more often than not, it's a husband kills a wife or a wife kills a husband. And I mean, it's
Right.
solved the next day. But the mob murders almost never get solved. So if you go to the list of the unsolved murders in Milwaukee's history, you find a lot of underworld connections there.
Well, the last place that Fazio was he was at the Iron Horse Bar.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the Iron Horse Hotel in Milwaukee does have a couple of ghost stories, doesn't it, Allison?
It does, yes. But the Iron Horse bar, where was that? Like the Iron Horse Hotel is in the Menominee Valley, not far from Harley Davidson Museum, where I will be performing tonight if the snow lets up. But yeah, so the Iron Horse Bar, where was that located? I wonder, like, what part of the city?
Yeah, I don't have an address on it. I just have like his nephew was working at the Iron Horse Bar.
Interesting.
And that was the last place. He came home, and then he was murdered.
Yeah, I couldn't give you an exact address, but most of these places are just like around like the area of like between Wisconsin Avenue and like 3rd, 4th, 5th Street, just in that little neighborhood. You'll find so much overlap with all the nightclubs and the restaurants in that little area.
So what ward is that? So would that be like downtown, or would that
Yeah, I
be
mean, that's
like
downtown.
Walker's Point?
No, that's
Off
not
of
Walker's
downtown?
Point. That's downtown.
No. So it'd be like downtown proper.
Yeah.
Okay. So downtown was a place that if you were in trouble with the mob, don't go there.
All right, hold on. I think I found it here. The Iron Horse Restaurant. And Louis Fazio, he was a manager. It was 11th and Wells.
Okay.
So downtown.
Yeah. So it's just interesting. All these places, all these popular, like the Mafia is so related to obviously nightclubs, places of entertainment, things like that. And because that's a great way to launder money. Mm-hmm. Because you can lie about how many people came to your bar that night.
Right.
Especially when you're dealing with cash. I remember one time we played a show in New York City in Manhattan at this Irish bar called Desmond's. I don't think it's around anymore. And the guys that were running the bar were all Irish guys, but the guys who were doing the sound and set up the show were all Russian guys. And so we go set up in the back, and there's supposed to be a couple of local New York openers, and they didn't show up. It's a Saturday night, and the locals don't, like the local bands don't show up. I'm like, oh, this is going to be a disaster. And the Russian guys are at the door like, no big deal, just play. I'm like, okay. And so we ended up being a good crowd there. Because we knew some people coming out and we advertised and stuff. So it ended up being a good crowd. But the guys paid us way more than we usually would have been paid for a show of that type, or the number of people that paid at the door. And I'm like, what's going on here? Usually when a club owner or a booker sees not enough people or the locals cancel, they would be freaking out. And they're just like, no problem. Play music. And they were friendly. It was fun. We played. They shut down everything. And then
They paid you handsomely.
And we were paid handsomely. And then I realized, like, wait, that was totally a mob front. Obviously, because they could have said 1,000 people came in the door, 200 people came in the door, and they can launder that money right through that club. And I was their Nichelle Nichols.
That's right. You were just a pawn, Mike. How does that feel? A highly paid pawn.
You know what? That felt really good. So I'll be there. I'll be there, Stoolie, or whatever. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us today, Gavin. If people want to check out your books and learn more, we're gonna have to do a follow up on this to talk more about Milwaukee Mafia and obviously more about Madison, because Madison does have a series of unsolved murders that are fascinating that people around Madison do not know about. That would probably scare the crap out of them if they did. So we're going to have to talk more about that. But if people want to get a jump on those episodes and then read your books, where can they find them and order them?
Well, anywhere that books are sold, which these days it's fewer and fewer places, but Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com. If you have a local favorite bookstore, if they don't have them in stock, ask and they can order them. So anywhere books are sold.
And we'll definitely link in the show notes, right, Mike?
Yeah. We'll have a link to your author page probably on Amazon at othersidepodcast.com/271, and you guys can check out criminal historian Gavin Schmitt's books for yourself. Gavin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. It was fascinating.
Well, it certainly was a pleasure to talk to Gavin and learn from his knowledge of the Milwaukee Mafia and the history of organized crime in the Brew City. And, one of my favorite things is that, we mentioned that Frank Balestre's nickname is the Mad Bomber, but everybody in his organization called him Mr. Big. Like, I thought that was just something out of like cheesy cartoons or silly, mafia kind of shows. But no, they really did call him Mr. Big. Well, we couldn't pass up, putting that into a song. And also, I couldn't pass up using my sister's story in the song too, because I love hearing that story from Allison about how when she's looking out for ghost stories in the old Italian neighborhood, the guy tells her, "Allison, I like your smile, but snitches end up in ditches." And we used that for the inspiration for this week's song. Here's Sunspot with Snitches End Up in Ditches.
Was a price. Now you're in it for life. code of silence. You spill the blood on the saint. You cut a deal with your fate. You give it up to the feds and you wind up damn man, tell no tales about the made men who made them rich. Oh, stoolies might stay out of jail, but a snitch ends up in a ditch.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
Hey everybody, this is Wendy, and after that intense conversation about the Milwaukee Mafia, I'm just here to tell you thank you for listening. And thanks to all of our wonderful Patreon supporters for being part of the fun ride that is See You on the Other Side and Sunspot. We appreciate you so much. And an extra special shout out goes to our Patreon member, Dr. Ned, because he's pledging at a level that gets him this shout out. And Ned, you're truly wonderful. We appreciate all of your support. And I'm looking forward to our October hangout. What, you say it's not October? No, it's not, but Halloween's a busy time, so we usually push our October one into early November. So please keep an eye out for when that's happening. And if you aren't a member yet, it's not too late. You can always join at othersidepodcast.com/donate. And you can even join the day of the hangout and still be part of our gathering of paranormal minds. I look forward to it every month. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great week.
Snitches end up in ditches.